We are at the exciting process of painting the bird. So I've pulled out the original photograph just to kind of run over how we're going to follow the light versus the shadow. This actually works out great because I've got the moon shape here, and I'm going to use that as kind of like my light source. So just like on the photograph, you can see the light source is coming in from this way because the back side of his head here has got some light hitting it. He's also got that place on his eye where the light is hitting it, up here on top of his wings. So we're going to kind of follow this format. This area down here will be in shadow and much of his tail as well. So we're going to kind of follow that format, and I know that in reality, this used to really trip me up, so I'm just going to share it with you guys. Like, I would think to myself, okay, so the moon is way back here, and it really wouldn't be giving off that much light. So in reality, there wouldn't be that much light on here, and it certainly wouldn't be hitting his eye, and I got too hung up on, like, what reality is, and so newsflash, we're artists, and we get to make it up. So it really gives your painting life if you have a light source and kind of follow that throughout the painting. So let's get started. We're going to break this up just like we did our background in sections. We're also going to paint our bird in sections. So we'll do the head and the body together, and then each part of the wing and his tail, and we'll also do the mask and his beak as a separate section. And I'm going to start with the red of his body first. And I'm using the red from the Prima Classics palette. So absolutely use whatever red that you have or that you like. This is once again another of those exploding watercolors. So if you're not using an exploding color, it'll be a little bit different for your water, or your color won't travel as much. You may have to use more brush strokes. And also make sure that you have changed your water from using all that blue. We're now going into a red, and you want to make sure you have clean water. All right, so the first part I'm going to do is the body and the head. And surprise, surprise, I am going to wet the area first. So I'm going to be a little more careful in wetting than I was when I did the background. I got a hair in here. Ooh. Okay, so I'm going to be a little more careful when I do his body in water because I want this to kind of sink in. So I'm going to take a little more time. I'm not going to use quite as much water. I don't want many puddles to happen. I just want to have a shiny surface that paint can flow into, but I don't want it to flow quite as much as the way we did our background. So I'm just taking a little more time in my approach and a little less water. Okay, so once I have the entire area wet, I'm going to start with a fully loaded brush, and I've got about a mid-size here, so this is a 5. So you want to, for this area, go about mid-range, not too big, not too small. And I'm going to start down here in the bottom where the most intense color is going to be. And you can see how I'm fully loading my brush with this red color and really getting intense color down in this area. And once you lay your color down, you can always grab your small brush to really hug those lines. Helps to be more precise. And as I come up, still thinking about light and shadow, So as I come up the bird, I'm going to lessen the amount of paint that I put on my brush. So I'm bringing up the color, and when I come back over here, I'm grabbing just a little less and a little less, and I'll work it out further into the water. So you can see how this color starts to fade. Always keeping a check on this part down here to make sure that it stays pretty deep and intense. So I dropped in a little more intense color here, and now I'm going to start working towards my lightest area, which is right here on the back side of his head. And this area down here is still wet, so I am going to be adding in a little more intense color. While it's still wet, I want this bottom part to be really, really intense. But make sure always that your paint is wet. Make sure you're not using too dry of paint. It'll look blotchy. And once I come to this back side, I'm going to slip down to a slightly lesser brush here. This is a 2, and pull that color out into these tiny little areas here. Okay, and now that I've got my red on there, I'm actually going to grab a little bit of this indigo color. I'll pull it over here so you can see. I'm using my small brush. I just rinsed off, I dabbed off a little, and I'm grabbing just a tiny amount of the indigo, and I'm going to put it right down here in this shadow area, because I want this to stand out as darkness, shadow in this area. So I'm not using a lot of it. I don't want this indigo to take over the red. It should kind of blend in with the red, and it'll almost turn like a deep purpley color. It'll work really nice for some shadow effects. I'm also going to do that right around his little mask in a couple of areas. And if you look at, thinking about the bird, you can see here how right behind his eye there's some shadow here, and his head part has also got some shadow here. So we're going to kind of mimic that just to give him a little shape and form. So I'm going to add a little deeper red right behind his eye and right here. Add a little more intense color, almost like I'm giving him a neck. So right in this area here, I'm grabbing just the tiniest bit of that indigo. I didn't even clean my brush for that one. Really tiny amounts, because you don't want it to overpower. Give him a few more lines of just shadow form, almost like his little feathers are creating some shadow effects. So another thing that I like to do is add a little brightness to this area back here where that light is shining. So I grab a tiny, tiny amount of yellow just like I did with the indigo, and add that in, because a lot of times what can happen is that when you add water to red, it turns into kind of a pinkish tone, and I'm trying to avoid that. I want him to look really red. So I'm almost like using the yellow as a lighter tone. Okay, so that is about all you need to do for the body. And I'm going to let this dry, and then I'll work on the feathers.